For decades, suburban homeowners have watched yellowjackets invade their patios in late summer. Wasps patrol their yards, threatening children and pets. And yet, when you look at how pest control actually works at scale, a curious fact emerges. The most effective methods aren't always the ones being marketed to you. The solution to eliminating yellowjackets and wasps within a half-mile radius exists in the space between commercial pesticide chemistry and something far simpler, something that used to be understood, then gradually forgotten as industries shifted. But here's what matters. This approach works without harming the honeybees your neighborhood depends on. So where did this method come from? And why did it disappear from common knowledge? Welcome to Hidden Fix Lab. We investigate the forgotten solutions hiding in plain sight, the ones that work, the ones that matter, and the ones the market sometimes overlooks. A problem born from expansion, the yellowjacket did not exist as a significant problem in North America before the 20th century. This fact alone reveals something important. What we now treat as a natural disaster of suburban summer is actually a creation of a specific moment in history, one where landscape, economy, and biology collided in an unforeseen way. Wasps, of course, have existed for millions of years. Yellowjackets, the particularly aggressive scavenger wasp species that dominated backyards by the 1960s, arrived in North America with European colonization. They were stowaways, insects transported unintentionally in cargo, soil, and timber. For the first 3 centuries, they remained a minor nuisance in rural areas and farmland. They were noticed, they were inconvenient, but they were not yet a crisis. The crisis emerged when the suburbs did. Between 1950 and 1970, American suburban housing stock more than doubled. This expansion followed a calculated pattern. Developers cleared forests and grasslands, installed manicured lawns, planted ornamental gardens, and built outdoor spaces designed for leisure: patios, picnics, swimming pools, uncovered trash receptacles. These were the infrastructure of post-war American comfort. What nobody recognized immediately was that they were also the infrastructure of an ecological shift, one that would make yellowjackets thrive at unprecedented densities near human populations. Concurrent with suburban expansion came another shift: the chemical pesticide industry. During World War II, synthetic insecticides were developed for military and agricultural purposes. DDT, synthesized in 1874 but not weaponized until the 1940s, became the cornerstone of post-war pest management. By the 1950s, these chemicals were commercialized and marketed directly to consumers. The message was clear and persuasive. Modern chemistry could solve nature's problems. Homeowners could buy bottles from hardware stores. The application was straightforward. The results appeared immediate. But the history of how humans dealt with aggressive wasps before synthetic chemistry reveals something else entirely. Agricultural records from the 1800s and early 1900s show that American farmers and beekeepers managed wasp populations through methods that were labor-intensive but demonstrably effective. Beekeeping journals from the early 20th century document targeted approaches, specific timing, specific placement, specific containment strategies. These were not guesses. They were refined over decades of necessity. Farmers could not afford poison. They could not afford to harm their honeybees, which were essential to crop pollination and honey production. So they developed methods that worked within those constraints. What happened to this knowledge? As synthetic pesticides became cheaper and more accessible in the 1950s and 1960s, the older methods were gradually abandoned. Hardware store shelves filled with spray bottles. The narrative shifted. Chemistry was progress. Traditional methods were old-fashioned. By the 1970s, a generation of homeowners had grown up knowing only the chemical approach. The older knowledge faded, not because it stopped working, but because it became economically irrelevant. Why spend an afternoon on a targeted strategy when you could spend 15 minutes and $10? Yet something curious happened. Decades later, as environmental concerns mounted, and as some of the broad-spectrum pesticides faced restrictions or phase-outs, researchers occasionally looked back at the historical records. What they found was striking. The methods documented in 19th century agricultural journals actually worked. The science behind them was sound. But by then, an entire system had been built around a different approach. The question that emerges is not whether effective alternatives existed. They did. The question is why, once they disappeared, they were never systematically restored to common knowledge. Why broad approaches fail, and why precision works. To understand why yellowjackets became such a significant problem by the 1960s, and why conventional pest control often fails to address them completely, it's necessary to examine how these insects actually behave, not how we assume they behave. Yellowjackets, scientifically classified as Vespula species, operate under a biological imperative that shifts dramatically with the seasons. Throughout spring and early summer, colonies remain relatively contained. The queen is laying eggs. Workers are focused on brood care. Aggression is territorial but localized. But as autumn approaches, this changes fundamentally. By late August and September, the colony enters what researchers call the scavenging phase. The queen's egg-laying slows, the colony has raised thousands of workers. These workers, suddenly without the intensive labor of brood care, redirect their foraging behavior. They become scavengers. They search for protein and sugar sources wherever they can find them. Garbage, outdoor dining, fallen fruit, human food. This is not a choice. It is an automated behavioral response encoded in their neurology, triggered by seasonal environmental cues. This timing explains a phenomenon that confuses many homeowners. Why do wasps seem to appear suddenly in September? Why does a yard that was relatively peaceful in July become a minefield in late summer? The answer is not that new wasps arrived. It is that the behavioral ecology of existing colonies shifted. The significance of understanding this distinction cannot be overstated. Most commercial pesticide approaches, aerosol sprays, perimeter treatments, general insecticides, operate on a principle of broad suppression. They kill wasps they contact, but they are indiscriminate. They kill individual wasps without addressing the source, the colony itself. A homeowner might spray 10 Yellowjackets on a patio, but the colony, located somewhere within a quarter-mile radius, continues to produce hundreds more. The next week, the problem reappears. This is not a failure of chemistry, it is a failure of strategy. Targeted colony elimination approaches work on different logic entirely. Rather than attempting to intercept individual foragers, the goal is to deliver a lethal dose directly to the colony's reproductive center, specifically to the queen and the developing brood. Research in applied entomology has documented that when a colony's queen is eliminated during the late season scavenging phase, the colony collapses within days. The workers, suddenly without chemical signals from the queen, cease cooperative behavior. The colony disintegrates. The key insight, and this is where commercial products often diverge from actual efficacy, is that this approach requires precise timing, precise placement, and precise attractants. The bait must be attractive enough to recruit foragers. The toxin must be non-repellent, so workers will consume it and carry it back to the nest rather than avoiding it. The placement must be strategic, positioned between known foraging areas and the colony's likely location. Broad-spectrum pesticides fail at this task. They repel insects or kill them on contact, preventing the necessary forager behavior that would transport poison back to the colony. This is why a yard sprayed with general insecticide often shows temporary relief, followed by rapid recolonization. The trade-off that makes this approach economically challenging is that it requires knowledge of wasp behavior, seasonal timing, and placement strategy. It cannot be simplified into a bottle with a spray trigger. This explains why, despite its demonstrable efficacy, selective targeting never became a mainstream commercial product. You cannot achieve high-volume sales with a method that requires the consumer to understand and execute a specific protocol. The honeybee question adds another layer. Broad-spectrum pesticides kill honeybees incidentally. They are not selective to yellowjackets. They suppress the entire arthropod ecosystem. Targeted colony elimination, when executed correctly, uses substances that honeybees do not encounter because they do not target the same food sources in the same locations. The wasp forages in open air on human refuse. The honeybee forages on flowers. The overlap is minimal. Yet here's the unanswered question that emerges from the science. If the behavioral and chemical mechanisms are well understood, why has research into optimizing these methods remained marginal within academic entomology? Why does the majority of published research still focus on broad suppression approaches? The answer may not be scientific. Why markets choose inefficiency? The question of why an effective solution remained obscure is not primarily a question of science or engineering. It is a question of incentives. Specifically, it is a question about how the economic structure of the pest control industry was built and why that structure naturally favors certain products over others. After World War II, the American chemical industry was flush with capital and momentum. Synthetic pesticides developed for military applications were suddenly civilian commodities. Companies like Monsanto, Dow Chemical, and others pivoted rapidly toward consumer markets. By the 1950s, pesticide sales were growing at double-digit rates annually. The business model was straightforward. Manufacture a broad-spectrum chemical, sell it through hardware stores and garden centers, and rely on repeat purchases. This is not a conspiracy. That is just economics. A homeowner purchases a bottle of wasp spray in July. The spray provides temporary relief. By August, wasps return. The homeowner purchases another bottle, or they hire a pest control service which applies chemicals every 2 weeks throughout the season. The service visits 6 times. The customer pays approximately $300 to $500. If the customer signs an annual contract, the pest control company has recurring revenue. That revenue compounds. Over 10 years, a single customer generates $3,000 to $5,000 in service revenue. Now consider the alternative. A one-time targeted treatment in late August that eliminates the colony permanently for the season. The cost to the homeowner might be $50 to $100. It happens once. The repeat customer probability drops dramatically. From a financial perspective, the recurring model is superior. That is just economics. This is not unique to yellowjacket control. The same pattern explains why lawn care companies push chemical fertilizers and weed killers on regular schedules, rather than teaching homeowners how to manage soil health independently. It explains why pest control companies maintain contracts through seasonal spraying, rather than promoting permanent elimination strategies. Recurring revenue is the foundation of a sustainable business models in consumer services. One-time solutions are anomalies in this structure. The commercialization of pest control products followed this logic. By the 1970s, major chemical manufacturers had established distribution networks through national hardware chains like True Value and regional garden centers. Shelf space was allocated based on profit margins and inventory turnover. A spray bottle priced at $8 with a 60% retail markup occupied the same space as a more sophisticated product, generating half the profit. Store managers naturally stocked the higher margin items. The regulatory environment reinforced this structure. Bringing a new pesticide product to market in the United States requires EPA approval, which involves toxicology testing, environmental impact studies, and field trials. The cost of EPA registration for a new active ingredient can reach $5 to $10 million. A large chemical manufacturer can absorb this cost. A small company selling a specialized targeted solution cannot. The barrier to entry became economic, not scientific. What emerged by the 1980s was market consolidation. Smaller pest control companies, the ones that had developed local expertise and targeted approaches, were acquired by larger regional and national chains. These chains operated on the recurring revenue model. The specialized knowledge of local operators was systematized and standardized into cheaper, broader spectrum approaches. The knowledge did not disappear because it became false. It disappeared because the economic incentives that once supported specialized expertise had shifted. A pest control technician trained in targeted colony elimination could not compete, on a cost-per-service basis, with a technician trained to apply the same chemical spray to every property. The specialized skill commanded no price premium. The business model had no room for it. Here is what reveals the economic logic most clearly. When a pest control operator does employ targeted colony elimination, the customer often does not understand what has occurred. They see the technician place something in their yard. They wait. The wasps disappear. But because the result matches the result of chemical spraying, and because chemical spraying is the expected intervention, the customer attributes the success to whatever they perceive as the standard approach. The specialized method is invisible to them. The surprising revelation, then, is not that effective methods were suppressed. It is that they were abandoned not through malice or corporate conspiracy, but through the entirely normal operation of market forces. A system was built that worked well for the companies running it. The system was not designed to optimize for consumer outcomes. That is just economics. From knowledge to action. Understanding the history, science, and economics of yellowjacket elimination means nothing without practical execution. The effectiveness of targeted colony elimination rests on precision in 4 areas: timing, placement, bait formulation, and containment. The timing is non-negotiable. Late August through mid-September is the critical window. At this point, the yellowjacket colony has entered the scavenging phase. The queen is still alive, but egg production has declined. The worker population is at peak numbers. A colony targeted during this window can be completely eliminated within 5 to 7 days. Earlier in the season, the effort is less efficient. Later, as temperatures drop, foraging activity declines, and the bait becomes less attractive. Consider the case of Michael, a homeowner in suburban Columbus, Ohio. His situation is representative. In mid-September, yellowjackets were aggressively targeting his outdoor dining area and pool deck. He had called a local pest control company and received a, quote, $420 for an initial treatment plus a follow-up visit 2 weeks later. That is $1,000 for a full season of management across multiple visits. Michael instead implemented a targeted approach. He purchased food-grade protein powder, mixed it with a slow-acting toxicant approved for this purpose, and placed small portions, approximately 1 teaspoon per container, in 5 locations around his property perimeter. The placement strategy was critical. He identified the likely flight paths between known foraging areas and the probable colony location. He did not place bait directly on his patio, where he and his family were present. He placed it 50 to 100 feet away, in areas away from children and pets. The total cost of materials, approximately $45. The labor, approximately 1 hour. Within 72 hours, yellowjacket activity on his patio had declined by 80%. By day 5, no yellowjackets were observed. The colony had collapsed. The mechanism, explained simply, foragers discover the bait, consume it, and return to the colony. They regurgitate the protein mixture to other workers, who distribute it throughout the nest. The slow-acting toxicant does not kill the forager immediately. Immediate death would trigger avoidance behavior and prevent bait recruitment. Instead, it accumulates in the colony's food stores. Within days, worker bees begin to die. The queen falls. The colony disintegrates. Safety is paramount. The toxicant used in this approach is selective. It targets the protein-scavenging insects that will consume the bait: yellowjackets, hornets, and German wasps. Honeybees do not scavenge protein in this manner. They forage on flowers. The probability of a honeybee encountering bait placed on the ground, away from flowering plants, is negligible. Children and pets should not be permitted to contact the bait containers. For the same reason, one would keep any pest control material away from them. The safety profile is actually superior to broad-spectrum aerosol sprays, which kill everything they contact. Common mistakes occur predictably. First, placing bait too early, before the scavenging phase begins. The bait will be ignored. Second, placing bait directly on the patio or in high-traffic areas. This defeats the purpose of the targeted approach. Third, using bait without the proper toxicant formulation. Some homeowners attempt to use household insecticides, which repel insects rather than attracting them. Fourth, inadequate containment. Small containers must prevent spillage while allowing wasp access. Fifth, abandonment. Impatience in the first few days leads people to switch to broad-spectrum spraying, which interferes with the bait strategy. The cost comparison is stark. Commercial pest control, $300 to $1,000 per season, plus ongoing risk to non-target organisms. Targeted elimination, $40 to $100, with lower environmental impact. The convergence. 4 separate narratives have been traced through this investigation. The historical record shows that effective methods existed before chemical standardization. The science explains why targeted approaches work while broad suppression fails. The economics reveal why effective methods were economically displaced rather than scientifically disproven. And the practical application demonstrates that the knowledge remains accessible and executable. What emerges is not a hidden conspiracy. It is a more subtle phenomenon, a system that works perfectly well for the companies operating it, but was never designed to optimize for the people living inside it. The Yellowjackets of late August represent more than a summer inconvenience. They represent a moment where forgotten knowledge, when recovered and applied with precision, solves a real problem better than the standardized solution most people accept without question. This is not about wasps. It is about what happens when a system becomes optimized for efficiency and profit rather than actual human outcomes. And what happens when you understand that history, science, and economics are not abstract concepts. They're explanations for the exact problem sitting on your patio on a September afternoon. The knowledge exists. The science supports it. The economics explain why it disappeared. The only question remaining is whether you will act on it.